to be in this session. This was a paper titled An Assessment of the Role of Agency Among Semi-Skilled Workers and Challenges in the Attainment of Development Outcomes from the use of ICT. The work's been done by my student Ivonia Liebenberg, who's here, and I will just present the background and context and hand over to her. We're based at the University of the Western Cape in Cape Town. The work is actually premised on, I work a lot with both local and provincial government in developing and designing and assessing, etc., a number of different public access to technology, public access to technology initiatives. And this work, in a sense, was premised on some of that. In the presentation today, we would take you through the entire paper in the normal sequence of the research, starting with the background, and Ivonia would take over from the theoretical framework. So let's just maybe give some of the problem context or what was behind. This was, by the way, a very, how could I say, small-scale, narrow research project that we did within the year, at the first year of postgraduate, which is what Ivonia undertook. So it's not an extended study by any means, but it was a needed study to help understand a particular problem that we had come across. And just in the South African context, historically, I suppose, like many other countries in Africa, the inequitable distribution of telecom services is quite apparent, depicted both geographically and through income. So if you come into South Africa, it's very much a true world in terms of telecoms, depending on where you are and who you are. We have very good policy at various levels, national and regional, etc. In our national plan, we talk of a dynamic and connected, vibrant information society and knowledge economy that's inclusive, equitable, prosperous. But the problem, although we have such, now good statements and intentions, there's still a large number of people who are not active. And last year has shown us that, the urgency with which, we have to deal with the problem, because as we went into major lockdown last year, a number of these people who are outside of the traditional information society have been outside or left outside of the dynamics that prevailed in being kept up to date and the rest of it. So in essence, the questions around why we have, although we have provided access, how can we intervene so that there can be tangible outcomes for poor people? And that's kind of behind the question. Just to take you a little bit more into the digital divide indicators in our country. If you look here, this is ITU data of 2019 showing worldwide. But what we can see here, for example, is this is where we are in South Africa compared to Africa. And households with internet access at home, and as you can see, that our household indicator is still quite low, which means then that the average person, especially the poor person, even in urban areas, let alone rural areas, is quite dependent on other means that we can provide them for access to the internet and the like. So even if we look here across, we are broken down into provinces in this country. So these are the 9 provinces, but let's just focus on here for a moment. And you can see here again that at a metro and urban level, we have 17 and 25. So even if you break it down, that 17 and 25%, availability of internet at home is really not good. And so government, we've been focusing on trying to develop educational and internet type facilities, or public access as we call it. And the big problem is, although yes, there's a very high penetration of mobile, it's really not affordable. We have one of the highest basket costs of technology in the world. So given the low penetration at households, public access ICT programs are being used, and we'll continue to use it in this country to mitigate the problem. of the divide. Where we live in the Western Cape, there are two well-known initiatives that I've been part of for some time. The one is at a metro level called the Smart Cape, where every library is equipped with public access infrastructure. And this is a provincial government initiative called the ICANN Center, all of which have different ways of provide internet access facilities at the public level. So the question really behind this research is that a lot of these initiatives focus at the access layer and are focusing here at the access layer. But the research and understanding is that, you know, we really want effective use where people are able to integrate use of internet through their devices in their everyday life. But between the access layer and the rest of it, there's lots that we don't understand. And that's what is behind this research. How do we get there? How do we move beyond the access into adoption and effective use? So the problem really is that we did some research in the public access centers a few years ago, and we could see that a lot of it is the youth. And there are others in the communities, in poor communities, such as this demographic here, lower income, the middle-aged people who are not active. And this research sought to probe, well, what are the issues and the challenges? And so the primary question that Ivonia investigated is, what is the role of agency among semi-skilled workers in accessing and using public internet towards the attainment of their personal development goals? Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Ivonia now, so she could take us through the research approach and the rest of the paper.
Thank you very much, Prof. Betha. Good morning to everybody and welcome. And I would also like to thank everybody for the opportunity and the time for allowing me to present my research paper. Just a quick background. My name is Ivonia Liebenberg and I am an honors student at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa. I'm very excited for this conference because it's my very first conference and yet it's a virtual one. Okay, Prof, would you mind moving on to the next slide, please? Okay, so when we conducted the research, we conducted semi-structured interviews, which was face-to-face interviews, and then it was conducted at the premises of the organization, where it was between September and October 2019. We engaged in purposive and snowball sampling in order to identify our unit of analysis, and our sampling objective was basically to identify 25 semi-skilled workers at an organization. It was situated or is situated in Bellville, which is in the Western Cape province of South Africa. Then we identified security guards as well as cleaners that were aligned to our unit of analysis. Now, while we prepared our interview, we had to design an interview schedule, and we extracted elements from the choice framework in order to gain a broader perception rather of how this group of individuals make a choice in order to use the internet. Then the interviews were recorded with an audio recorder, and we also made use of field notes and observations, just part of our data collection strategy. Now, I also made use of Atlas TI, which is a qualitative coding software, in order to help me to code the transcripts and come up with various themes, and also to create network diagrams in order to write up my findings. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, this graph just illustrates the demographics of the respondents. And what I want to highlight here is that most of the respondents consisted of security guards. And all of these respondents that we interviewed basically had a low level of education, of which was less than a high school certificate. As you can see, only 60% of these individuals had less than a high school certificate. Another important factor that I would want to highlight is that the monthly income was between 5,000 to 10,000 Rand per month, and that is 84% of the total respondents that actually earned that income per month. I also indicated the US dollars there in case you would want to convert that, just to have a clear picture for you. Next slide, please. This is the choice framework that was designed by Dorothea Kleiner, and this is the choice framework that we use for our study, just as a lens to help us to understand why or how various components rather come together in order for these individuals to attain developmental outcomes. And as our research question was focused on wanting to understand why or what the challenges are that prevents a certain group of people to achieve choice of using the public access in order to gain developmental outcomes, we found that this was actually a suitable framework. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this framework, just very simply, at the bottom on your left-hand side, you will see that there's a block called agency. Now, Kleiner normally, or when she actually explains that this group of agency consists of at least, say, 10 resources, and these individuals, they use their agency or their resources to navigate the structures in order to use the internet or to have access to public access centers. Now, based on the agency, this will then result them in achieving degrees of empowerment. Now, once a person achieves choice, which is the higher level of degree of empowerment, it ultimately resides in the principal developmental outcome, which is choice, and this will then result them achieving other developmental outcomes such as easy communication, increased knowledge, etc. So in a nutshell, basically that is what the choice framework is all about, but I will just delve into more detail but later when I speak about the findings. Next slide, please, Prof. Okay, so although I said there are 10 resources in the choice framework, I'm just going to focus on 4 because these 4 actually stood out for me when I did the analysis. So we also found that besides only these 4 resources, there are other factors as well that have an impact on how these individuals achieve developmental outcomes. Now, material resources basically just refers to items owned such as a computer or other equipment in order to access the internet. And about 80% of these respondents do, however, own a mobile device that is capable to connect to the internet. But because they do not make use of other devices such as a computer or a laptop, these are one of the biggest problems that they face, because when they are at work, they cannot use a computer or a laptop at all. And due to the lack of the material resources, we found that there is a gap in ownership of devices, which results in a lack of ICT skills and knowledge, and also the confidence to access the internet. Educational resources refers to having the skills to use both a device and know how to use the internet. Although these respondents do have access to free Wi-Fi at the workplace, they are unable to use the internet to attain developmental outcomes because they have a lack of ICT skills and knowledge. And this, I indicated on the demographic slide that 60% of these respondents have a the level of education was below that of a high school certificate. And I remember when we asked these participants if they knew what the internet was, nobody could give a direct answer or explanation, because we had to try to probe additional questions to rather allow them to understand the question better. So we kind of like got the idea that they do know, but they also don't know, basically, if I can put it like that. Then psychological resources, it refers to having the confidence, tenacity, as well as resilience. Now, in general, the participants do have a lack of confidence, because some of them said that when they open up Google Chrome or whatever search engine, they just type in anything, and then whatever information comes up, that is basically what they want. So it felt like they didn't know what they were looking for. They just typed in anything at the search engine, and most of them said that they are even scared that they clicked the wrong button, because what if something else appears and then they don't know what to do. And this was also in line with they not knowing what the internet is and how to use it, and the lack of the skills and the knowledge, definitely. Then moving on to geographical resources, this is just basically explaining or refers to the location and the distance to access the ICTs. Now, again, these respondents do have access to the free Wi-Fi at the workplace, but both the public access centers and the cyber cafes are not in close proximity to where they live. Now, this is, despite the autonomy of use, they do indeed face restrictions in order to use the internet when they are at home. For example, when they are off and not at work, they want to use the internet. Now they face with this dilemma: how are they going to get to internet cafe? Because I know that one of them also said that they need to travel with public transport to get to the nearest internet cafe. And because of the crime and safety also that's in the area, none of these internet cafes exist there, so they need to travel to another area should they need the internet. So this is also related to the constraints in terms of achieving developmental outcomes. Now, we also identified 3 factors that also played a role in terms of them not achieving the developmental outcomes, such as
2 minutes.
Thank you. Such as affordability, the low level of income, as well as the time constraints. And these users, or rather respondents, because they security cards, they work a 12-hour shift. So they cannot sit with their phone whole day or be on the internet at how can I say, because they work shifts, they need to plan the day, if I can put it like that, because they can only use it at lunchtime, or when it's quiet at night, they are able then now to use the internet. Next slide, please, Prof. Not going to go into much detail with this slide, but this is just basically explaining how all of the respondents are presented with an existence of choice, and some with a sense of choice, but because of they are unable to move to the next degree of empowerment, which is use of choice. And then because of the deficiencies, oh, that's a big word, they are unable to achieve choice. Next slide, please, Prof.
Efficiencies of resources, that's what you want to say. Yes.
Thank you, Prof. Oh, my tongue. Just in conclusion, the research was done to better understand the nature of the digital divide and the low uptake among working adults from poor communities. And we found that material, educational, psychological, and geographical resources are all deficiencies that prevents these individuals to attain developmental outcomes. And the most substantive one was because of due to the lack of the ICT skills and the knowledge, the lack of the awareness, as well as understanding the ICT. Now, a recommendation came about where the respondents said that they would want to attend workshops or short courses just to help them understand the use of the internet and how to use a computer. So I think that would be a further study there. But we want to emphasize that should these happen, we want it to be aligned and linked to awareness campaigns in order for these individuals to increase their awareness and the effective use of ICT. And then just in conclusion, what I want to say is that even though this group have access to the free Wi-Fi at their workplace, but due to their lack of or their deficiencies in the agency, they are unable to make effective use of the internet. So it's like denying themselves of the potential developmental outcomes that they could potentially realize. And that's the reason why this research was conducted. And as such, we can conclude that the lack of the agency do result in them not achieving their developmental outcomes and effective use of ICT. And that is my story. Thank you very much.